Hey everyone, Broderick here. Just wanted to give you a heads up that the video in this recording has a few glitches in it. Nonetheless, I feel like it is adequate enough to share with you all. Enjoy the episode.
Well, living well is about being truthful. Intimacy and truth are closely related. That intimacy isn't something you do, it's something you be.
Hello everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Today, our guest is John Travis, MD, MPH, specialized in preventive medicine at Johns Hopkins, founded the first wellness center in the United States in 1975, co-authored the best-selling Wellness Workbook, and developed the first wellness inventory used online worldwide. In the 90s, he shifted his focus to infant wellness, co-founding the Alliance for Transforming the Lives of Children. This and the birth of his daughter in 1993 led to an interest in vaccine safety. Hi, John.
Greetings from far away in Australia. It's already tomorrow here.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very different than where I am right here in California. But I think this is my first conversation with someone across the globe. So this is going to be interesting to see how all these things work out here.
I'll be back in May. I'm a fair weather fellow and I follow the sun. So being a dual citizen, I can live here half the year.
That's great. I understand following the sun. So that I'm from the South Carolina, and I miss that heat in the summer.
Yeah.
But sunny California is okay. But I'm in the Bay Area where it can be a little on the cooler side. So
Yeah, I
the
know it
cooler
well.
side. So
That's where I started
yeah.
the center was in Mill Valley, where it's very cool in the summer.
Yeah, interesting place. We'll definitely tap into that as this conversation unfolds. I know I just read that bio, but I do like for guests to kind of share their own personal introduction and how they like to describe themselves. So have at it.
Well, when I interview people, I always like to know who they are and why. And my why has a lot to do with growing up in a small town in Ohio, in the cornfields. And my dad was a country doctor. Um, he would often have patients come by the house, or I'd go over to his office after school to get a ride home, and they'd say, "Are you going to be a doctor like your daddy when you grow up?" And it didn't take much to figure out the right answer to that question. So probably by age 5, I had decided to be a doctor and blindly followed the route to that, studying. I went to the College of Worcester in Ohio, which chemistry was a ticket to med school. And I hated chemistry, but it was what I had to do. And then I went off to Boston to med school at Tufts University, where I was a token WASP, Midwestern WASP. And boy, that was a shock. East Coast boys are a lot different. So I fought my way through 4 years of med school and then fled to California, where I did an internship at the Public Health Service Hospital on the backside of the Presidio. It's now a luxury condominium, but in those days it was, and it was right after the Summer of Love. There were still, Haight-Ashbury was going strong, and I had missed Woodstock. It was my senior year in med school when it was going on just up the road from me in Boston. But I knew something was going on. And during my internship, I stumbled across one night, it was April of 1970. I had a patient come in who was a postal employee. We took care of the merchant marine and government employees and Coast Guard. And he was in for a hernia operation. And when I went to get him to do my intake, he was meditating. And the nurse said, "Meditating? You don't do that except in church." So he proceeded to show me a paper by Herb Benson, Lowering Blood Pressure with Meditation. And this was in Boston at Harvard. And I had just come from there, like, whoa, blew my mind. And that led to a series of my becoming basically a hippie wannabe as an intern. I apprenticed myself to the one hippie I had avoided of the 20 of us interns. And he gave me a crash course, including Ram Dass. And the book Be Here Now was still in self binder with a vinyl record in it. So I did all that and went back to Baltimore for my residency. I knew I couldn't do sick care because patients uh, were wanting me to drug them, and I couldn't remember drug doses. It was like something's wrong with masking symptoms with drugs. And that began my now 50 some year tussle with Big Pharma, who I could see was taking over clinical medicine at that stage 54 years ago. And now they've taken over public health as well. But it was either Vietnam or Baltimore, and that wasn't a too hard choice. So I did my residency in preventive medicine basically to buy time, figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, because I knew it wasn't going to be sick care after my internship experience. And that what I would go, it was kind of boring. I had to do a master's in public health. That's what, it's not miles per hour, it's MPH. I would go over to the medical library to escape the boredom of the classes that were inflicted on us. It wasn't preventive medicine, it was early detection. And I stumbled on a little book called High Level Wellness that was at that point 10 years old. It was on the clearance table for $2. And it was the best $2 investment I ever made. It altered my life. I thought wellness was a silly word, but it had the guy who wrote it was Halbert Dunn, MD, PhD. He had founded the U.S. Department of Vital Statistics in 1935 and had been in charge of that department. But as he reached retirement in the late 50s, I think because he saw how bad things were, he decided to come up with the term high-level wellness. The word wellness had actually been in the dictionary since the 1600s, but no one knew what it meant. He defined it as a mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical approach to health. And that blew my mind. It was, wow. So even though I thought wellness was a silly word and would never catch on, I embraced that. And that led to my starting this wellness center in Mill Valley after I finished my 5 years in Baltimore, basically studying biofeedback, meditation, transactional analysis, group therapy, Gestalt. Was reading Abraham Maslow's work on self-actualization and who was the Carl Rogers and all of the new forms of psychology and psychiatry. So I went back to California where I started out as an intern living in Mill Valley and opened this wellness resource center with a part-time secretary and a part-time biofeedback practitioner, thinking, it would just be a little quiet hole in the wall. And I was plunged into national notoriety due to the fact that George Leonard, who was an editor at Look magazine and had discovered Esalen and made it popular, and his wife found me and had me interviewed. I was written up in New West magazine by him, then on Prevention magazine, and suddenly I had this national notoriety, and I wasn't prepared for it. I was traveling all over the country and spoke to the Surgeon General in Canada and his staff, and it was a wild 5 years. Running the center, which never actually could break even. My speaking engagements made up the difference. And I burned out. At that point, I met an Australian woman who had read about me in a book and come to our last seminar. And we wound up getting married and moving to Costa Rica to live in the back to the land life that I had missed uh, from the hippies. So that ended my adult uh, wellness center operation, but not before getting interviewed by Dan Rather on 60 Minutes, which aired in 1979. And he opened the piece saying, wellness. Now, there's a word you don't hear every day. And it was true because we had to spell it on the when we answered the phone, Wellness Resource Center, because they thought we were saying wilderness or wildness or, but as a result of that 60 Minutes piece, the word caught on, but then it got co-opted by alternative treatment people, and it changed the whole definition from one of self-actualization, education, awareness, and growth to other forms of treatment. So that was my path to adult wellness. While in Costa Rica, I discovered how hard it was to be self-sufficient. It's not easy at all. And I was living in a Quaker community up in the mountains of North Americans who had fled after the peacetime draft was instituted. Meanwhile, I missed my daughter, who was then 7 years old. She came to Costa Rica a few times, but uh, I forgot to mention that Reagan had just been elected, and it looked like the U.S. was bankrupt and the whole system was going to go down. And I wanted to live simply, and Costa Rica was a wonderful place to live. But amazingly, Reagan borrowed from the Japanese, kept us afloat, even though we were bankrupt. And the peace movement took off. The 100th Monkey book came out of Ken Kai's and so forth. So I began going back to the States, doing circuit writing. My Wellness Workbook had just come out in a mass market version. I had self-published it originally. And we traveled around the country in a VW van with cartons of books, talking to helping professionals, which led to starting a wellness network of helping professionals. My wife, the Australian woman, had gotten involved in the women's spirituality movement. And I started learning about patriarchy. That was a strange word in the 70s. This was early 80s. And realized that the medical system is very patriarchal, authoritarian, and the medical students at the bottom of the totem pole, and we climb our way through this hierarchy. But the wellness model that I developed was a partnership model, and this difference between the domination authoritarian model and the partnership model became central to our work, because physician burnout was rampant at that point. It still is, but we were noticing it and gave it a name in the 80s and did workshops for professionals of how to get support from finding other partnership-oriented people within this system. And we developed a network. We did workshops, intensive workshops where we used the work of Starhawk and other feminist spirituality leaders. That was my second career, basically, discovering this whole dominator system that I had grown up in and was slowly breaking out of. So that's been a major course in my unfolding. I had always felt like the little boy who was saying the emperor was naked, because it seemed to me that things are different than what people were saying they were. And as I've evolved, it's gotten worse. So I've gone on for a long time. Do you want me to continue with the next phase, or you want to throw some questions in, or what?
Um, yeah, I think that that's a nice summary of a lot of things that you've done and the trajectory of your story. And for me, I think my next question is what does living well mean? But I think if you want to continue to share a little bit of your story of who you are, that's fine with me. I think that's important.
Well, living well is about being truthful. Intimacy and truth are closely related. That
Mm-hmm.
intimacy isn't something you do; it's something you be. And
Mm-hmm.
when you are truthful with yourself, and at around this time, I also learned about the human shadow, which Carl Jung had defined, and his what later became the MBTI, the way of assessing your personality. So it was a wonderful book. Maybe you know this guy, Michael Ventura, uh, in LA. He wrote a series of articles for a LA Weekly that was published as Shadow Dancing in the USA. It's a fantastic book. Um, and it turned me on to all of this undercurrent of stuff that I was feeling and seeing in medicine. Like when I was an intern, we couldn't talk about death, and I found my level of
Mm-hmm.
depression, because depression is a lifelong issue for me. And in my family, only my mother was allowed to have feelings, and so being depressed was a way of suppressing feelings. And I discovered that the number of cancer patients I had directly correlated with my level of depression because we couldn't talk about it. Kubler-Ross
Mm-hmm.
was writing on death and dying at that time, but it didn't come out till the next year. And I went to hear her speak in DC and got the book, and wow. But we couldn't talk about it. And so that suppression of truth in medicine was a distinctive component, but in all aspects of what was going on. Like a fellow I met later when I started the center, who had a similar center in Mill Valley, was an intern the same place I was 2 years after I was. And he pointed out that there was a death among the house staff. And we had a fairly small house staff every year. My year, it was my resident's wife committed suicide, and another uh, resident attempted suicide, and I was the first one on the scene when he was blue and tried to intubate him, and he survived, but that was it for his career. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the year that Rich was talking about, an intern injected himself in the heart with a cocktail that killed him, and his wife at the time later married the guy who started Medical Self Care magazine, which I was very involved with in Mill Valley. So all of these interconnections.
Mm-hmm.
And when Rich brought this up in the House staff meeting, they said, "Oh no, this isn't a problem. They were that way when they came here. Like nothing going on in medicine to lead to suicides." And at that time, and I think still, doctors had one of the highest suicide rates in of any profession. So anyway, that became a theme and a personal struggle. So for me, the more I can be in touch with my truth, um, the less depressed I am, and the greater intimacy I can experience. So, but what I discovered, one of our board members, we created a nonprofit, kept pushing me to read this book, The Continuum Concept by Gene Liedloff, and finally got the library edition of it out of the Santa Rosa Library and read it and got really depressed for 2 weeks afterwards. It turns out in the second edition, she wrote in the preface, "Why not to get depressed uh, from reading this book? Because you weren't the only parent in the world to do it right." And I forgot to say what the book is about, which she discovered studying rainforest tribes in Venezuela, of the happiest people she'd ever encountered. And she wanted to know why. So she went to their village 3 times before she figured out it was how they treated their babies. And basically, they treated like mammals. They carried them everywhere. They slept with them. They let them play with each other. They didn't overprotect them. They would walk along the edge of a cliff and no fear of falling over the cliff. They would play with knives, and they knew enough not to hurt themselves. And she then wrote this book, which describes everything that we do wrong in American child rearing. Uh, it became very popular in Europe, not so much in the States, though it did lead to the development of attachment parenting, where William and Martha Sears picked up on it and came up with the term attachment parenting, which led me to decide to have a child after 21 years, because my first marriage ended after 2.5 years due to the what I later formulated is it takes 3.87 adults per infant to meet their needs. So do the math
Mm-hmm.
that having children in a nuclear family usually destroys the relationship, if not physically, at least emotionally. And the normal number of uh, relationships that break up around having children. So it was always a village. You know, you had the aunties and uncles and grandma and grandpa to take care of the kids, which makes it a sane operation. And a nuclear family is I call it the nuclear family experiment. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's a disaster. Um, so this led to first having another daughter 21 years and almost 21 days after my first daughter was born, and using attachment parenting, co-sleeping, carrying her, treating her like a mammal. And that became my work, along with Suzanne Arms, who wrote uh, uh, the immaculate a book called Immaculate Deception. It was a New York Times top seller in 1975 on the birth industry and how it destroys the natural birthing. So the whole natural birth movement took off in the 70s, and Suzanne was at the center of that. So we co-founded this organization called the Alliance for Transforming the Lives of Children. And 13 of us on the board eventually uh, co-created a document. We put 10,000 hours into it of the ideal system for raising kids. None of us had ever done that. You know, we wished we had, but it was an idealized system, which we can aim towards, but few people can
Mm-hmm.
accomplish it in this culture. So that was my career in infant wellness, which I realized was more important than adult wellness. It determines what your later state of wellness is going to be. So, and that led to discovering what happens when in a nuclear family, the father often feels like a fifth wheel. His job is to go out and earn money to support his wife and her new lover, because she has now a connection with this baby that she's carried and hopefully nursing that no man can ever experience. And that bond both re-stimulates his early failure, because almost no men have had that connection in my generation anyway. Hospital births, infant circumcision, which is the betrayal of trust from the mother. I'll get into that as another aspect of my work. But so the guy feels left out. It's like she's got this other lover. He can't say that, but that's how it feels. And that leads to this disconnection. So um, I developed a theory of why that happens. And ultimately, we published a book on it called Why Dads Leave, and a website, connectedandthriving.org. So that was uh, actually two careers, the infant wellness and then looking at relationships. So all of this again had to do with struggling with the corporate takeover of not only medicine but then public health, with um, the uh, push on circumcision, which only the United States and South Korea circumcise infants.
Mm-hmm.
Jewish circumcision is on day 6, and that's a whole lot better than day 1. And it's actually a very small percentage of the nearly 3/4 of the men in the U.S. are circumcised. It is uh, extremely traumatic. It's passed off as, oh, he'll never remember, but he'll never forget. So that became a major part of my work. We published papers. There was efforts to make it sound like it would prevent HIV, which it doesn't. Uh, and I spent a lot of time publishing We had a letter in the New England Journal of Medicine and another number of articles that I published with my um, advisor at Johns Hopkins, who was world famous in the health education area. So I was tackling that corporate takeover. It's a $2 billion industry, circumcision in the U.S., and it's a major trauma. Then I became aware of fluoridation in water, which the data behind that are really lame. There's now a major court case that's going on. There's going to be a decision made in the next few weeks that could reverse that. I was successful here in Byron Bay in blocking an attempt to add fluoride, but there's absolutely no data to show that it's healthful. It prevents tooth decay because the rates in Europe are the same with no fluoride. So that became another unpaid struggle against the corporations. um, and it seems my calling that the emperor is naked just continues to follow me from one field to another. So being truthful, recognizing the corporate takeover of every aspect of our world, which has become even more blatant in the last 4 years, um, is my continued calling. So learning to speak up and which was difficult for me. That led to depression. It's actually, I was 65 years old when I had a breakthrough and reinvented myself and began being more truthful with myself to that extent. So um, that's my path up to now. Where it's going to go at age 81, I don't know. I still figure I got a good 10 or 20 years to find out. Uh, we're in the midst of what Strauss and Howe predicted as the fourth turning of a predictable 90-year cycle that cultures, particularly the U.S., have gone through. Our last cycle was in the fourth turning. There's a major secular crisis, and I think everyone can agree we're in the midst of that. The previous one was the Depression, World War II, and before that was the Civil War, and before that was the Revolutionary War. And I will, having been born at the beginning of the cycle, I think I'm going to make it to see what the outcome is, and I'm giving it all my energy to an outcome of a better world where there's more truth, where corporations haven't captured every regulatory agencies and the mainstream news, which are basically ads for pharmaceuticals. It's still here. My pharmaceutical clash from 1970, it's still here, and it's bigger and better. So um, that's how I'm living well. And
Yeah. So you've had quite a storied history here, and you've um, I think one of a common theme that I see is that you really care. You want to see a better world. Your interest in well-being uh, and not looking at well-being as simply alternative um, means to uh, healing or curing diseases, but well-being or wellness in terms of how we show up in the world.
mm-hmm.
Starting with that, and then keep moving with this desire to try to inspire a better world through your um, I don't want to say attack, but on your uh,
Confront.
yes, confronting. Thank you. Systems that are that can lead our society astray and that can cause a lot of harm. That has caused a lot of harm, and I admire that. I admire someone who's dedicated their entire life to um, trying to fight against systems that are not really truly interested in our well-being, but interested in um, packing up their pockets, filling up their pockets with
Yeah.
cash, I'm not super cynical, but there is a lot of that going on, to be truthful. And having, I'm sure you and I disagree on certain things, but I think we do have that common interest. And that's one of the things I want to do with this podcast is to highlight our common interests. I know I want to see a better world. That's why I'm doing this podcast. And I spent my whole life trying to do that as well. And it seems like you spent um, a life longer than I've been on this planet fighting for a better world. And that's very admirable. A question that I want to ask you about is, can you elaborate more about, if you don't mind? I know you're in a different phase of your journey in your professional work, but there are several things that you've done that I think is very interesting and definitely pertinent to our time right now. Can you elaborate a little bit more on wellness and the wellness continuum that you created? Can you say a little bit more about
Yeah.
it?
Um, the illness wellness continuum came to me in a flash of inspiration in probably 1972, I think. And it was based on I was involved in the health risk appraisal. I knew the guy who developed it, Louis Robbins, out in Indiana, and I stumbled on it when I was in my first year of my residency at the Kaiser Hospital in Oakland, where I was given a desk in an office where the founder of Kaiser had a desk. And on his desk that I was using because he wasn't there was this little book called How to Practice Prospective Medicine. And it was this whole series of numbers of looking at your behaviors and predicting your actual age. And this has
Mm,
since become worldwide used. I was the first one to computerize it for the Public Health Service. And yet I discovered that we could scare people with showing that they're smoking and drinking and not exercising and overeating was going to lead to taking years off their life, but it didn't motivate change. And that
mm,
led to my wellness inventory, which took us over on the positive side. His continuum was premature death was the worst case and no risk was the best case. In between were signs, symptoms, and disability. And I realized from this book of Dunn's, High Level Wellness, that there was another side of the continuum beyond no risk, which I call the neutral point. And to get there involved the person doing something for themselves. There wasn't any problem to fix. And the medical system, the treatment paradigm, I call it, is about fixing problems. And that's on the left side. And it's important to use to get us out of our pain and suffering. And but in parallel with it is the wellness paradigm, which is a partnership paradigm where you work with a wellness coach. The coaching model is probably the closest to that. We were doing that at the center before the term coaching was anything other than football, and uh, working as a partner rather than as an authority. I developed this thing called the pill fairy, of showing a picture of the fairy dropping pills into the open mouth of the victim wanting to be fixed. And it could be pills, it could be acupuncture needles, herbs, incantations, whatever. It's
mm-hmm.
still a fix me model. And that's what the illness wellness continuum shows. And it's on my Wikipedia page. I have to struggle with Wikipedia because it's been taken over by the CIA, basically. All my friends are written off, all the people who founded integrative medicine, holistic medicine, they're all written off as quacks. Wikipedia, the co-founder of it has agreed that it's been completely taken over by the mainstream. And so they have me described as being wellness as being part of alternative health, which it's not. And if I change it, they change it right back because they don't make that distinction. But that's if I'm remembered for anything, it'll be the illness wellness continuum that has those two distinct, different um, paradigms of partnership and of it's really more of a parental relationship. If you've got somebody who has an expertise and skills who can fix something and help you fix it, so they go side by side. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
Yeah, that's the start. I want to ask a little bit more about that positive side because I'm with you on that. In that, um, I went to a naturopathic medical school there in Seattle, Washington, and
I lectured
I,
there in the 70s. I saw it firsthand when it was new.
I know. I was like, yeah, you were there when it first began, and a lot of it is the fix me kind of stuff. I don't practice medicine, and I think I'm much more interested in what people call preventative, but like how do you take better care of yourself, and how do you align yourself such that you can enhance your well being and minimize suffering in your life. So I'm with you on that. That it's yeah, you can take that mentality, just if you're using herbs or whatever modality, which I do, like you said, there is benefit to it. It's important to use that stuff, but this other piece gets left out quite a
Yeah,
bit, and that other piece is the wellness part that you're speaking of. That's not simply let me give you a pill to fix your
yeah,
illness, or to mitigate your illness. It's more of how do you live, and I want to hear a little bit more of your perspective on that because I think that that's really crucial to living a good life or to living well is what you're terming wellness. And so, what does that look like? What does that positive,
yeah.
uh, those positive
Well,
pieces look like?
shortly after I came up with the illness wellness continuum, a similar kind of inspiration hit me of what later became called the wellness energy system. And I began to look at health and life as a result of the kinds of energy that we take in and put out. And I realized that there's three forms of energy. We take in oxygen and food, and we combust it in our cells with our mitochondria to produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the gasoline that runs our body. And
Mm-hmm.
those are two. The third one is what we sense in the world, the non-physical and the physical. We get heat from the environment, or we'd freeze to death. We get um, attention, love, connection, all of these environmental supports that we need are a form of energy. What we do with that energy inside our body is we convert it to ways of expressing energy, from moving our body, moving the blood inside our body, the electrical connections of our nervous system, the thinking that goes on. So there's moving, and then there is uh, our feelings, the emotional aspect in our brain. Our brain uses like a third of our energy. It's an enormous energy processor, both feelings and thoughts. Those are two other forms of energy that come out of what we've taken in. Um, Playing and working activities are another form of energy that combine these different aspects. Then there is communicating, both internally and externally, um, experiencing intimacy, the connection with other people, and ultimately the spiritual dimension, which I call transcending, where we recognize that there's more going on than just the physical material world, which religions have attempted to package. Unfortunately, the results aren't always that great with the number of people being killed for religious reasons. Um, I think I've got all of them. They're organized in a model, and then the Wellness Workbook has a chapter on each one of these, and the Wellness Inventory asks 10 questions about each one of these. And it's now online at wellnessinventory.com, or we used to have a paper version. We sold maybe 200,000 of them. It's also in the Wellness Workbook as a longer version called the Wellness Index. So assessing where you're using your energy is essential. And it basically reflected my own uh, needs and efforts. When I began working with the staff, they pointed out some areas I was missing, like sleep wasn't in there because I hadn't had sleep issues since she did, my partner.
Mm.
So it evolved over time, and the workbook's now in its third edition. It's still in print, starting from the 70s. And self-awareness of recognizing your energy and uh, altering it so it's a healthier, from your diet, from your exercise, from your um, how you breathe, what kind of air you breathe. All of these different components make up the bottom line, which is your state of health or wellness. So I hope that
Mhm.
clarifies it some.
Oh yeah, that's just good stuff because I think it's a very comprehensive approach to living well, a very comprehensive approach to wellness. And out of all those things, you didn't mention anything about take this pill or supplement or thing. It's more like how am I living? How am I
Yeah.
using these energies in my body and the energies available to me outside of the surface of my skin? And then how do I transmute those into a life well lived? That's the way I'm interpreting that. How
Mm-hmm.
do I transmute these energies in such a way that I can express myself with um, I will ask you this: would you agree that one should work towards expressing themselves and with joy and happiness, peace, and um, love? What are some of those qualities, those attributes that one can have if they explore this something such as your wellness continuum? If I'm not, yeah, illness
Well,
wellness
you've
continuum.
named them. There's a teaching that I found very useful, the Abraham Hicks law of attraction, which is when you're having a negative thought, try to think of one that's just a little bit better and work your way up the continuum. Uh, we do tend to create our reality by our thoughts. There's a lag time, but ultimately, it is our worldview, which is created pretty much while we're in the womb. That's why the infant wellness is so important, is that we tend to, I hate this expression, first year of life or first days of life. You're 9 months old when you're born. And those first 9 months have more to do with who you are than anything that happens to you afterwards. You were hearing your mother's voice by about 16 weeks. Uh, you were experiencing her emotions all along. So the quality of the pregnancy is important. Um, all of this shapes a person's sense of worth. Gene Liedloff, who wrote the continuum concept, said the crucial thing is for a baby to feel worthy and welcome. And
Mm.
a hospital birth does anything but that. If not dragged out or drugged, I was dragged out unconscious and then had a third of my penis cut off the next day with no anesthetic. It's not a very happy way to come into the world. Then I was on a 4-hour bottle feeding schedule and I got hungry after 3 hours and screamed. My mother hated it, but she said she had to follow the rules in the 1940s. And what it led to for me was a negative sense of self-worth. There's two different aspects, self-esteem and self-worth, and they're very different. Self-esteem is what we consciously can work on in therapy and compensate for by our life. It's what we know and feel and think about ourselves, but our self-worth is a pre-verbal, deep, unconscious process. And I would say, someone once said that America is the world's greatest experiment in loneliness. This disconnection that we see, our health, we're somewhere around 34th in infant mortality. Uh, Chronic illnesses in children is off the charts. We're one of the most unhealthy nations in the world, and we have the most
Mm-hmm.
expensive illness care system. It's not a health care system, it's an illness care
Exactly.
system. And most of it has to do with how we've brought babies into the world and what we do to them after that with the environments that we're in. So I lost my train of thought there. What was I saying? About infants and babies. The connection of what Liedloff said of feeling worthy and welcome. So we can have a great sense of self-esteem and a crappy sense of self-worth and not even realize it. And that
Mm-hmm.
shows up in our shadow, Jung's concept of uh, projecting. I came up with this expression, you are what you hate, and in parentheses, and love. The concept of projecting our shadow onto other people. So if there's, Byron Katie is wonderful on this subject, and also NVC, that nonviolent communication, deals with it, of how we tend to project what's going on in our shadow onto other people. And then if there's someone around you you really can't stand, Byron Katie's method is, um, it's 4 steps. The first one is you make a judgment. My memory shelves are overstocked sometimes, and I thought it was on the tip of my tongue. Uh, Ask 4 questions, turn it around. The 4 questions are: is it real? Are you sure it's real? And how would it be different if you didn't believe that? And I'm butchering her concept here for people who know Byron Katie's work. Uh, my apologies. Otherwise, go look up Byron Katie and the work. It's amazing for projecting, owning your projections. And one of my beliefs is that the more we can recognize and eat our own shadow by shining a light on it, the healthier and happier we'll be. And it's there. Everyone has a shadow, both a positive and a negative. There's a gold shadow and a dark shadow. Uh, the same thing with people you admire and worship. It's a quality in yourself that you're not owning. So um, that projection outward is an extremely important piece of wellness to me. And it's an ongoing bit of work. I've founded a lot of different groups to support me in that. Last night, our love group met. It's a group that's been going for 15 years, where we just share our love for each other and our rough edges. And it's important to have that support and to create that support around you. So I think I've come close to answering your question. But
Beautiful, Jack. Beautiful. Yeah. Just even in on that part just
mm-hmm.
touches my heart there. That you have a love group that you all meet and share how much you love each other, and also the challenges. You've touched on so many things so far in this conversation. That's why I'm like, just allowing you to elaborate on your story. You've uh, explored so many different things. You've touched on so many different themes that I can we can explore extensively well beyond an hour. And I just wanted to allow you to just free flow and share that wisdom. And I think you're speaking about it quite eloquently. And I think that the audience can take a lot from a life of interest in human well being, and from in the wound to throughout adulthood. I just think it's great stuff that you've shared.
Well, the whole aspect of conscious dying, which I'm facing more
Mm,
as in the sunset of my life. In many ways, they're the happiest years of my life. I'm no longer.
mm,
I didn't say that my path in wellness was financially a struggle. I've lived below the poverty level all my life, and yet
mm,
it's been a very rich life. I've been able to travel and have experiences, and not tied to a boss and a work schedule and so forth. I've been able to create pretty much on my own. Um, and before I forget them, there are 3 kind of mottos that I've come up with. One of them I think I mentioned of um, what you. Let me back up. The one at top of the list right now is all criticism is autobiographical. And I think
Hmm.
that's Byron Katie, but I'm not sure. But when you're criticizing something, it's telling us more about you than the person criticized. That's
Hmm.
again projecting your shadow. Um, you are what you love and hate. Uh, and the third one is slipping my mind right now, but when it pops back in, I'll tell you. Um,
Hmm.
but I was just saying that conscious dying is um, the one I'm facing. Of Ram Dass came up with the expression "walking each other home." That going back to the source, if you believe something like that,
Hmm.
um, recognizing that this body and mind are that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. Um, that continues to be a concern to me. Um, as my body has started to break down in some areas, I'm fortunate compared to most of my friends are much worse off, but I've got a few areas that I struggle with. I continue to mountain bike several times a week. I've always hated exercise. That was the toughest one for me, but I discovered, thanks to Joe Mercola, HIIT, or high intensity interval training, where you only have to put it as hard as you can for 30 seconds and then rest 90 seconds and then do that 6 times. It takes like 12 minutes. Um, I can do that, and I've been doing that for some years. Uh, on the subject of diet, I discovered through a dear friend who was helping people get their ketone bodies working again, that we've lost our ability to burn ketones, which normal humans have, uh, by having 3 meals a day and never fasting. Humans, for 99% of our time on the planet, would feast and famine, and we're designed to be able to
Hmm.
do that. But this constant input, largely of carbohydrates, destroys our liver's ability to make ketones, which is very important. So I keto adapted with this man's program for 2 months, cut way back on my carbs, and tested my blood ketones. And then that led to um, intermittent fasting, where I only eat during an 8 hour window during the day, and I don't get hungry like I used to. It's changed my whole approach to food. So these are some of the physical things that I can do. And then staving off this inevitable, I'm hoping that I'll have a hockey stick curve of right up to near the end and not have this, so many people are on so many drugs. The
Hmm.
US drug taking, even compared to Australia, is something like twice the number of drugs. And it's a pill for every ill. Uh,
Yep.
Most of them have horrible side effects that then lead to more drugs. And
Hmm.
that's a huge problem of, again, where big pharma has taken over medicine. And a famous author of an integrative medicine text, I'm blocking his name at the moment, I interviewed him in my oral history of wellness project. Uh, when I first met him, he said, yeah, I was trained to listen to the patient just long enough to attach a drug to their symptoms, and that's it. Uh, so that was what I was trained to do, and it's criminal to
Hmm.
actually listen to a patient. There's the integrative medicine and functional medicine fields that came up around the same time I was doing wellness. Started out as holistic medicine. Norm Shealy was one of the founders of it, and Gladys McGarry, who's now 102 years old. I interviewed her when she was 99. Uh,
Oh.
these were my mentors. And I've just mentioned that I have doing this project. I've interviewed over 120 uh, mentors for me, and who have led me to explore so many different areas. So I wanted to capture who they were and why before they died. And a number of them have died, some since I've interviewed them, and some I missed. But there is a legacy of people that went before me that I would hope to capture. Who will ever watch it, I don't know. I'm looking for some funding to edit it and put it together better. It's pretty rough, but anyway, that's an aside of as I move into my uh, sunset years, how to handle uh, the organ recitals that often occur when I meet someone my own age, and um, we go over our latest problems. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to mention that comedy has been a lifesaver for me. My partner Yvonne has um, led me to when I met her at age 68 and ended a 42-year marriage with a wonderful partner, but we had our relationship had deteriorated, and we were publishing the book Why Dads Leave. It took 18 years of our child that left home, but we watch a lot of comedy and clever comedy, stand up and so forth. There's some really great thinkers. Ricky Gervais, man, he can stretch your brain. There's Hannah Gadsby here in Australia. She's done
Mm-hmm.
3 wonderful programs on Netflix with starting in the Opera House in Sydney. Um, just amazing ways of turning problems into humor. Um,
Yeah.
so to me, we go to bed every night watching Dry Bar Comedy in Provo, Utah. I pay them $5 a month to subscribe, and they bring all this clean comedy. Dry bars because there's no bar. They don't sell alcohol. It's in Mormon land, and uh, most of these comedians you've never heard of, but they're fantastic. There's all
Mm-hmm.
different kinds, and that's how we go to sleep is with a little comedy. So
Yeah. This is great stuff. You man, I didn't have to ask many questions. I think that you
well,
touched on so many different things um, that we can take into consideration. And I love that you brought in comedy near the end and how the sense of humor and laughter is so important to a life of joy and a life of well being. You've mentioned so many things. You mentioned so many characters that I've been exposed to in my life that I never really delved deeply into. But I know a lot of those names, and this has been a great conversation. I know that we can go for hours because anybody with your I'm serious. You've had such an amazing life of activism and struggle to encourage a healthier, a better world. And there are many things that I resonate uh, with you about that you've brought up. We're coming to a close now. We're right around that hour mark, and I just want to yeah, commend you on a journey of trying to make the world a healthier world. And yeah, I think what you're doing, what you've done is important. And I'm glad that you brought up to this. You're at this phase of your life, and you're continuing to explore and try new things. You're biking now, and I just think that's great. You know, it's never too late to take on some of these ideas and try to apply them in our lives to try to make our lives better. And I know we're coming to the end, and I know that you mentioned that living well for you is truthfulness and integrity, and of course all of these things that you've done around wellness and the things that you've brought up, and I haven't even include humor in that. Um, are there any final words that you would like to leave the audience with?
well, the summation of my life's work in 6 words is the currency of wellness is connection. And
Mm,
connection, I realized all 12 of the energy system in the model I described, the forms of energy are forms of connection with the environment that we connect through physical means and emotional means and verbal means, that humans are programmed to connect. And we do a lot in pregnancy and childbirth to disconnect them. And to me, that is the core area that we need to look at, to how to treat our babies as mammals, to sleep with them, to carry them, to nurse them on demand, to sing to them in the womb, to recognize that they're conscious beings in there well before they're born, and to have a pregnancy that's healthy and emotionally unstressful. And, that's our connection is profound. And we're living at a time where disconnection is rampant. There's deliberate efforts to disconnect us, to get us to fight, to divide and conquer. And there are nefarious forces at work that I'm hoping will be defeated, that have been attempting. I've been censored. I've been vilified. I've been treated as a leper for my stand against big pharma and what to me has been a massive fraud of what was no worse than a bad flu season, and now an effort to create a digital currency that will control me completely. I'm old, so I'm not too worried about for myself, but my granddaughters, that's a concern to me. So the currency of wellness is connection, and thanks for the connection with you, Broderick, and
Yeah.
blessings.
Blessings to you. And I'm very grateful that we've had this conversation, Jack. And I think this idea of, the polarization in our society, you and I are doing something that I think is important that's related to what you just said. We disagree on certain things. We disagree about the details of certain things around, say, vaccines, for instance, that we didn't get into. But I want the audience to know that though we may disagree about things and we can argue, but we can still have loving connection. I can learn from you. You have 81 years of life experience. You've done so much in the world of wellness. And there's so much that I agree with you about. And what I was able to do today was to gain some insight from a person who's lived a long life. And I'm grateful for that. And yes, when I say fight, I don't mean like physically trying to harm each other, but it's okay for us to argue and debate about certain things. And we may never agree around certain things, yet we can love each other. And I can still learn and gain from a life well lived, a life that you've lived. And for you to be at 81 saying this is some of the best times of your life. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I hope the audience has learned from you as much as I have. And to remind you all, we don't all have to agree on everything. But yet, there's lots of love, lots of wisdom, lots of knowledge to be gleaned. So thank you for that. I appreciate you, Jack.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.